Welcome to this video on creating test data in PhixFlow. Test data can be used to prototype your application, test functionality and more. In this video we will explore 3 methods for creating test data. For this method we'll create a spreadsheet style screen that will allow us to edit and update records. For this method we'll create a large dynamic data set using a third-party data generator. For this method, we'll create a small static data set that can be easily rolled back and reset to its original state. Jump to the section that's relevant to your requirements. We'll start by creating a new table on an ERD. PhixFlow automatically adds a primary key and display name to the table for us. We'll just add one more attribute. We'll now create a screen from our ERD by clicking on More Options on our table. Then Create Screen. From the template, I'm going to choose an edit form as this comes with a delete button and a footer area where we can set up more buttons. Choose which attributes you want to display on your screen. We're going to select them all, then drag and drop them onto the screen. PhixFlow asks how we wish to display the data. We'll choose Grid. PhixFlow then asks if we would like to add actions. We'll say yes. Then on the Grid Actions wizard, we'll drag Delete Selected Records onto the Delete button on our screen to configure this button. We'll set up our button for adding records separately. We'll now set up our screen so that it is ready to hold our test data. Let's open up the View configuration and on the Actions tab, we'll toggle on Autosave. This ensures any data we enter into the grid is automatically saved without the need for a save button. At the moment, we are unable to click on a cell in our grid and make changes because the grid is set to read only. We can remove this by clicking on one of our attribute headers, then in the Properties under Grid Settings, untick Read Only. Repeat this step for all of your attributes except UID. Let's now add a button to our screen that we will use to add new records to our grid. From the Serene Grey palette, we'll choose this button. Drag and drop it onto your screen, then name it. The final step to creating an editable grid is setting up our Add button. Right-click on the button we just made and select Add Action Flow. Our input connection is on click. Add a calculate node with an output attribute that when fired will bring across the string new. I'll connect my input to the calculate action. Then I'll add a save node and connect that to write the data back to the table. Connect the out pipe from the calculate action to the save action and map across the output attribute we just made to the save action. If you have multiple attributes, you only need to map the value once. And that's our action flow completed. Let's now see our editable grid in action. If you require a large data set, this can be achieved using a third-party data generator, such as Mockaroo, and then use an API to retrieve the data. For this method, we'll need to start by preparing our API data and ensure it is in JSON format. For this example, I've created a data schema and mock API using Mockaroo. On an analysis model, I'm going to create a new HTTP data source and set this up with a connection type of HTTPS. In my data source instance details, I'll add the URL for my API source. Then I'll hover over my HTTP data source to add a new HTTP collector. In the properties, I'll set my request method to get or post. For my URL, I'll reference the URL I added in my data source instance details, followed by my API key. Under response, I'll set a return type of JSON, as this is the format of the data returned by the API. I'll toggle on lenient, as this allows any errors in the data. And I'll also toggle on allow non-scheduled collection, as this allows the collector to be run manually. If you would like to read more on HTTP collectors or any of the components in PhixFlow, click on the Help button. Finally, I'll set up a table to display the data by hovering over the HTTP collector and selecting Create New Table. In the table properties, I'll need to make sure that the attributes I want to display on the view are set up. In the analysis options, I'll set the table time period to transactional because we want to interact with our data and update it dynamically. I'll also make the table static to ensure the data does not change each time analysis is run. Now, when I run analysis on the table, I can see my dynamic test data being pulled across using my API. Using the techniques demonstrated at the start of this video, we can add this data to a screen where it can be used for testing. If you require a small static dataset that can be easily rolled back, this can be achieved using input multipliers on a table. For this method, we're going to start by adding a new table to an analysis model. Within the table's properties, in the input multiplier box, we're going to add the data that we want to use for testing as an array. Add the attributes that will function as column headers for our test data. For each attribute that will be populated by the input multiplier, set the expression to _input multiplier dot number. You can also add other attributes that are not related to the input multiplier. Now, when we run analysis on the table and show the view, we can see our test data in the table. As we covered previously, this data can be added to a screen and edited. That's all for this video. If you would like to learn more about the techniques used in this video, such as importing data using an API, search in the help pages.